I'm a 23-year-old female staying in Paris at a hostel with 4 beds to a room. This man introduces himself. He tells me to take these vitamins he had. I kept saying no, and he kept being pushy and asking why I'm afraid to take them. I told him I don't need vitamins from him. Later that night, he invites me to go out with him and tells me he'll show me a good time. He offers me a bottle of wine, which I decline. About 10, he heads down to the bar and tells me he'll wait 1 hour for me to come. I planned on going out that night, but not with him, obviously. He comes up at 11 and asks me why I didn't come. I told him I wasn't going out that night. After he left, I got ready for the club and headed there. I had a great night and got home around 9 a.m. He was back in the room and was angry for me going out without him, literally yelling at me. Immediately, I go downstairs and request a room change. In the late 90s, I accompanied my mom to England so she could see where her grandparents had lived. I was basically just there to look after her because my dad didn't want to come and my mom has a hard time doing things for herself. Our agreement was after spending a week in England, the second week we could spend in Ireland, but my mom was terrible at planning, so we ended up spending a week in sort of limbo in Liverpool, waiting for the Irish Sea to calm down so we could cross on a ferry. It was September, probably the worst month to try to cross, and we never made it to Ireland. So anyway, for 5 days, I had to try to find places for us to sleep at night because she had made no hotel reservations for the entire 2-week stay, and I was completely unaware of this until we were already in England. I picked a hotel that seemed okay, and my mom paid to sleep in a different room because she had really bad restless leg syndrome and shakes violently at night. It literally keeps everyone up. In the middle of the night, I heard a man yelling in the hallway. He had to have been very intoxicated. He was pounding on doors all the way down the hall and hitting the walls. Being a punk-ass kid I made the mistake of acknowledging his rage by telling him to shut up. This enraged him. He started beating on my door, screaming that he was going to kill me. He tried the doorknob, and thank God those doors have automatic locks. I started looking around the room and realized this hotel has no phones in the room. Like I said, this was in the 90s, no cell phones. I went to the window, but I was 3 floors up and the windows didn't open either. So I just stayed there, listening as he did his best to break down the door while threatening what he was going to do to me once he opened the door. This went on for at least 20 minutes. Somehow, I fell asleep. When I woke up the next day, I saw how much damage he had done. He had smashed in my door with a fire extinguisher he had pulled off the wall. There were dents and marks all the way down the hall where he had dragged it violently from end to end. The worst part was my mom, down the hall, never said anything. When I told the clerk as we were checking out, he looked at me like I was crazy and making it up. I told him, just go look. Later I asked my mom about it and she said, "Oh yes, I thought I heard you screaming. Was that you crying for help?" It was April 2008. I was 20 and living in Denver for a year-long work contract with a nonprofit in Boulder. My girlfriend, now wife, and my best friend Tim drove to Colorado from our home state to visit me for my 21st birthday. The nonprofit I was working for housed their workers in dorm rooms, and drinking was not allowed on site, nor were visitors allowed to stay overnight. So I booked a hotel room in downtown Denver for the weekend, where we could drink in honor of my 21st. The hotel was big, very nice, and in a safe central area of the city. So nice, in fact, that it was the same hotel that most of the politicians would stay later during the DNC convention of '08 that took place in Denver later that summer. My wife and Tim arrived Saturday morning, and we all met at the hotel. The day was fantastic. We drank across the city most of the day. By about 1 a.m., we got back to the hotel. The room was typical, with 2 queen beds. Bed 1 was close to the big window looking out across the city. Bed 2 was pushed up against the wall with a door that opened to the bathroom. You couldn't see the door or entryway to our room unless you were at the foot of bed 1. We drank more and chatted in the room until about 4 a.m. My wife was laying on the head of bed 2, flipping through the TV. Tim and I were seated at the foot of bed 1, staring at the window as we talked. As we talked, we heard some movement and the sound of the door opening. Without looking away from the window, I assumed that my wife was getting up to use the bathroom. A few minutes passed by, and I thought I heard some movement again, so I finally turned back to look around. I saw my wife still lounging in bed 2, as she had been. "Did you get up a few minutes ago to use the bathroom?" I asked her. "No," she replied. "I thought I heard a door," I said back to her, with her just looking confused back at me. "Yeah, I heard it too," Tim said, breaking his own gaze from the window. It was then I started to run cold and sobered up pretty quickly. Very softly, I heard Tim say, I think there's someone in our room." I lurched forward from the foot of the bed to look at the pitch black entryway. I could barely make it out, and I wanted to believe I wasn't seeing it. But there's a man dressed in all black with a black baseball cap pressed into a 90-degree corner of the entryway where the room and wall met. Absolute silence fell in the room, and it felt like hours passed as I started to panic in my mind like no way I ever have in my entire life. We knew that we weren't alone and hadn't been for a while, and he knew we had spotted him. Eventually, Tim got the courage to meekly speak in the direction of the entryway and said, "Hey man, is there something we can help you with?" Another period of silence that felt like an eternity went by. He slumped off the edge of the wall a little bit into the light and made eye contact with Tim and I. We all just stared at each other. Then eventually he spoke up and said, "Is this room 1709? "No man, it's not," Tim said, stroking his beard nervously. He stared at us a while longer, raising his eyebrows and shaking his head. He turned around and left. We then erupted into a million curse words and paced around the room. I called the front desk. They told me that he was drunk and they found him in the stairwell, directing him back to the right room. Minutes later, Tim called the front desk and they told him that he wasn't a guest. He was apprehended in the stairwell and taken into police custody. Then a while later, they told my wife that he had disappeared and they had no idea who he was or what he was doing. They told her that there wasn't even a room 1709 in the hotel. We got 3 different stories from them. We still have no idea what that was about or how he managed to get a key card to our room. We were sure that the door was closed. It was easily the most terrifying moment of my life. Always use the latch in your hotel rooms. We got the stay refunded and about $200 in credit for the food from the hotel. We should have sued, but we were young and dumb. This happened a few years ago, but upon discovering the sub, it reminded me of the incident that I wanted to share. The year 2018, me and 3 other friends, we were all males in our early 20s, decided to travel to Bali for about a week since it was cheap, and we had the time, so why not? Our itinerary included sightseeing, trying local foods, mountain climbing, visiting bars at the beach. Basically a typical vacation in Indonesia. It was honestly quite a surreal experience. The country is absolutely beautiful and the food was amazing. The only issue I had about the trip were the locals. Drugs are very prominent there, especially mushrooms. The streets were filled with druggies dying to sell you drugs. I'm not exaggerating when I say this. One dude even grabbed my arm because I ignored his 2-for-1 deal for a one-way trip to meet Jesus. I shrugged him off while my friends laughed it off, suggesting that I may be passing up a chance to meet our Lord and Savior. He looked rabid and frantic, like he was about to pounce onto me like a dog diagnosed with rabies. I didn't feel too afraid as we were confident that we would handle them since half of them were not even sober. However, that is only the tip of the iceberg. The horror starts when we went back to our Airbnb for the night. We had an early day the next morning and we were exhausted. The place was extremely cheap and it didn't even have the proper looking mechanisms for the door. It had 2 wooden doors which swung inwards, and the only way to lock them was to wedge a wooden block through the holes mounted on the door. It was quite a primitive lock, but it gets the job done, I guess. Everything was going well until the last night of our trip when we realized that the wooden block was missing. We looked everywhere for it, but to no avail. I just figured that one of us must have misplaced it somewhere. We settled for using a selfie stick instead, since we did not have anything that would fit the holes to wedge the door closed. We turned in for the night, since we had already stayed there for 6 days with no issue. I woke up to a strange clicking sound in the dead of night. I got out of my bed and thought maybe it was one of the guys, so I nonchalantly approached the noise. My friends were all asleep, so I decided to investigate the cause of the noise. The ruckus seemed to be coming from the door, so I headed towards them, feeling extremely confused. Who could be at our doorstep at this time of night? I noticed the doors were slightly opened and the selfie stick was horribly deformed. I peeked outside and saw 3 people staring through the gap between the doors. They were really close to the entrance and were attempting to push open the door. I yelled at them, questioning their intentions, as I noticed one of them was holding the wooden block. I was shocked and puzzled at the situation as I recognized one of them. He did the overall cleaning for the Airbnbs and pathways during the day, so there was no reason that he would be there at 3 a.m. The other dude asked if the wooden block belonged to us, as they allegedly found it on the curb outside our B&B. I definitely smelled bullshit, as there was absolutely no reason to do that at 3 a.m. I called for my guys, and the 3 men immediately ran for it. I clued in the guys on the circumstances, and we stayed up until the morning in case they tried anything funny. We decided to report to reception about the employee, but the description I gave them were not synonymous with theirs. They told me that the housekeepers that they hired consist of only females in their 30s or 40s. This sent shivers down our spine as we realized we had let a complete imposter in and out of our rooms while we were out. Luckily, nothing important was lost, and we got out of the situation safely. I can't imagine what would have happened if I didn't wake up that fateful night, as those doors were close to being opened. I was just grateful that that was our last night there. When I was 19, I worked nights at a shitty hotel chain in my hometown, and it was generally pretty chill. You'd get your weirdos and creeps, but I could handle my own, and I got used to it pretty quickly. However, this guy was way worse than anything I had encountered up until that point. It was an average night spent checking guests in, doing laundry, stocking, etc. There were 2 sets of doors at the entrance, the inner one being locked after night shift starts. Dude shows up around 3 a.m. and rings me through the lobby phone set between the 2 doors. Immediately before I could even get my customer service on, he starts frantically demanding I call medical transport, which I didn't really know what he was talking about, but I tried to help him the best I could, asking questions. Eventually I just let him in so I could get a better idea of how to help, but when I do, his whole tone immediately changes. He starts speaking in his monotone voice and has kind of a dead stare. I've never seen eyes so void of emotion, and not to mention, he had no physical signs of injury at all. Obviously, I was freaked out, but tried my best to carry on normally, asking him more questions. After the first 2 questions, he stops answering completely and continues staring. Keep repeating myself, and he's just staring. At this point, I'm pretty fed up with him, and I say, "Alright, I'm gonna call 911 to get you help." He then starts getting frantic again, going between begging me not to call and saying, "They won't let me go, and I can't go back there." I tell him that I'm not really sure how to help him if he won't let me call emergency services, so he needs to leave. He didn't even seem to need medical assistance in the first place. The guy goes right back to ignoring everything I'm saying and staring. Honestly, I should have just called the police right then and there, but I was overwhelmed by him, and getting the police involved is always the last resort for me. So I say, "You can rest here for 20 minutes and try to find an alternative transportation, but then you need to go." I go into the back to watch him on the cameras. 20 minutes goes by, and I come in to tell him that he needs to leave, and he starts arguing nonsensically. I go back into the back in exasperation. The cycle then repeats like for 2 more hours. Finally, I tell him I'm calling the police, to which he replies, Well, if you're gonna be like that, I'll just leave. Shit was comical at this point. I'm like, please do, I've wanted that the whole time. I was done with him, so I was basically yelling. He finally leaves. I did call the cops and reported him too. The freakiest part was, while I was telling my boyfriend about this guy, he recognized him from the description of his creepy ass stare and pulls up his mugshot with charges for rape, aggravated sexual assault, and a bunch of other shit. My then boyfriend worked at a homeless shelter for some years and had seen this guy from time to time. After that, I felt so lucky that he was just a weird, creepy annoyance for me. Who knows what would have gone down in different circumstances. Creepy hotel guy, let's not meet. This happened a few summers ago. My friends and I threw a going away party for our friend that was going to migrate to Canada. We went to this island and it was during non-peak season, so that means that we were the only guests there. We arrived at the island just after lunchtime. A few kilometers away from the resort, there is a small village just near the port. When we arrived to said port, the resort service vehicle was not there. They alerted us that they were going to be late because the vehicle broke down. We decided to stop by the small store and bought some other necessities that we had forgotten to buy in the mainland. There's a group of men around their late 20s that were catcalling us. Our group consists of 5 girls and 4 boys. One of the men catcalling came up to me and asked for my number, and one of my guy friends moved me away from him. Thank heavens. Our service arrived, but he was still staring at me, and to be honest, it creeped me out. When we arrived at the resort, it had cottages that were on stilts. You had to climb up the bamboo ladder to get to your room. It was also made from bamboo, just your typical hut. Even the floors were made from bamboo. The bathroom is separated from the huts and is for common use. We partied and I got tipsy fast because I'm a lightweight. I excused myself from the group and climbed up the cottage to change into my swimwear. My friends really wanted to go island hopping. I was also planning to take a swim in the beach and island hop, just to lessen the buzz. I was not able to change since the room just started spinning. I decided to nap it out. I told my friends to go without me. It was a long debate because they didn't want to leave me alone, but I insisted that they should go. After a few beggings, they went on island hopping without me. When I woke up, it was already around twilight. The resort was quiet. It was a bit dim inside the room. The resort hadn't turned on the lights since the electricity only runs via solar and generator. They only turn on the generator around 7 p.m. I can already feel the hangover. I used my phone's flashlight to help me see. I noticed that the door was slightly ajar. I was sure that it was closed when my friends left. When I was about to close it, the head of the guy from earlier popped out, and he gave me that creepy smile, still asking for my number. I told him to get out, but he was begging for my number. He even used his foot to stop the door from closing. I screamed and he kept saying in our language, which translates to, "Man, let's fuck." I kept on screaming, calling out for my friends. What the man said still makes me shake. He said, "Your friends haven't arrived yet." He was standing there for hours watching us. I kept on screaming for the caretakers of the island. I screamed help and finally saw beams of a flashlight running towards us. He quickly left and he ran towards the forest just behind the hut. I was shaking to the point that I was unable to stand up. My friends arrived a little later and the caretakers told my friends about what just happened. They asked for some help of the caretakers and the local chef of the island. They went on a manhunt looking for the guy. Sadly, they did not see him. We left that same night. We transferred to another island with a much more private resort. Several years ago, while on a business trip, I checked into a nondescript hotel that was kind of eerie. The lobby's dim lighting and worn-out carpet hinted at a place long past its prime. Upon entering the elevator to reach my assigned floor, I noticed a man standing in the corner. He appeared disheveled, his clothes wrinkled and stained, his eyes hidden behind thick-rimmed glasses. Darted around the small space, avoiding any form of eye contact. An unsettling feeling washed over me, but I brushed it off as a mere reflection of my own fatigue. Later that evening, as I returned to my room after a long day of meetings, I encountered the same man lingering in the hallway. His presence sent a shiver down my spine, as if he was a specter, always lurking just out of my sight. My unease intensified when he turned his gaze towards me, revealing a hollow stare that seemed to penetrate my soul. Over the course of my stay, the unnerving encounters with this mysterious guest continued. I would catch glimpses of him in my hotel common areas, always alone, always observing his surroundings. It was as if he had no purpose for being there, no agenda other than to sow fear and unease in those unfortunate enough to cross his path. One night, I was unable to sleep. I decided to walk the hotel's deserted hallways, trying to wear myself out. A faint sound led me to the stairwell, where I discovered the door slightly ajar. My curiosity got the better of me, and I cautiously pushed it open. To my horror, I found the unsettling guest huddled in the corner, muttering to himself incoherently. Fear gripped me as I realized the true extent of his unsettling presence. There was darkness in his eyes, a darkness that sent chills coursing through my veins. The air grew heavy with an unspoken threat, suffocating my senses. I retreated silently, praying that I would not be noticed. From that moment on, I avoided any encounters with that stranger. I took precautions to ensure my safety, always mindful of his lingering presence within the confines of the hotel. Every creaking floorboard, every fleeting shadow became a source of terror and a reminder that danger lurked just around the corner. When my business trip came to an end, I hurriedly checked out of our hotel, my relief palpable as I stepped into the outside world. The memory of the unsettling guest, his haunting presence, and the unspoken threat he carried retained etched in my mind as a reminder of the dangers behind the doors of a seemingly innocent place. Always trust your gut and be wary of your surroundings. When I was about 5 and my sister was about 3, we were staying in a Motel 6 that had an outdoor pool that my sister and I were playing in with our mom. My dad was, and still is, a preacher, and he was busy at one of the tables outside working on a sermon. A man at the pool noticed the Bible and used it as an opportunity to ask my dad for counsel. My dad said he would be happy to sit and talk with him. Not too long before that, my mom was getting my sister and I out of the pool and was going to take us up to the room to get bathed and cleaned up for dinner. The man was like, "Well, I'm not comfortable talking out here. Let's go to your room." My dad was like, "Sorry, but no, that's not an option." The guy was like, "You're a pastor. It's your responsibility to make me feel at ease so I can do some real healing." My dad was like, "Again, not possible, but I can meet you at the cafe and I'll buy you a cup of coffee and we can have a good talk." The man started getting frustrated and pushy and saying that the only way he was comfortable talking with my dad was in my dad's room. My dad said, "Sorry, good luck to you. It's not going to happen." Eventually, the guy got up and left, but my dad said he was pretty sure that this man was trying to get in our room to do very bad things to our family. We left shortly after that. I was walking to the lobby of the hotel I was staying at, and all of a sudden I hear, "Hey baby." And when I turn around, it's this lady that I have never seen before. She starts talking to me about her and a few of her friends are going to the local cemetery and asked if I wanted to join. She then asked me for my name and said, "I don't know you, but I have to go talk to the hotel because I need to check in." She immediately left. I live part-time in a tourist town, so I'm used to people asking me about directions, things to do, and places to eat, but this encounter set me on edge. Did this lady have ill intentions, or am I just paranoid? Years ago, during a road trip through a remote part of the country, I found myself seeking refuge for the night in a quaint, seemingly harmless hotel. It was nestled between towering trees and isolated from the bustling world. Little did I know that this cute-looking establishment would become the backdrop for a bone-chilling encounter that would forever haunt my memories. As I stepped into the lobby, a sense of foreboding washed over me. The air was heavy, and a musty smell covered the dimly lit space. The receptionist, an elderly woman with a vacant stare, greeted me with a disconcerting smile. I brushed off the unease, attributing it to exhaustion from my long journey. I was assigned to room 413. I made my way down the dimly lit corridors. The faded wallpaper peeled away, revealing the hotel's aging infrastructure. The silence was suffocating, broken only by the distant echo of my footsteps. Uneasiness settled in my gut, but the exhaustion won over, and I tried to convince myself that it was just my imagination running wild. As the night wore on, strange occurrences shattered any semblance of comfort. I would hear faint whispers echoing through the corridors, the sound of hushed conversations that grew louder and more distinct when I approached. Each time I reached the door handle, the voices were abruptly ceased, leaving me standing in eerie silence. Inside my room, the atmosphere was suffused with a heavy sense of malevolence. Shadows danced ominously across the walls, and an icy drift crept through the crack of the window. The ancient furnishings seemed to harbor secrets of their own. Every creak of the floorboard sent shivers down my spine, and the constant tapping on the window pane intensified my fear. It was dead of night, sleep eluded me. The room seemed like it was possessed by a life of its own, as if it was watching my every move. Shadows swirled in the corners, faint whispers filled the air, growing louder and more insistent. Unable to bear the torment any longer, I made a hasty decision to flee the hotel. As I rushed down the corridors, my heart was pounding in my chest. The whispers grew louder, and it almost sounded like manic laughter. It was reverberating through the desolate hallways. The receptionist, now absent of her post, seemed to have vanished into the air. I burst through the doors of the hotel into the safety of the night. I'll always remember my stay at 413 and that sinister presence of the hotel. I got in my car and drove to the next town and stayed in a normal hotel for that night. I don't know if I was just on edge, tired, or what, but that place seemed haunted.